Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Donald Trump's new administration is taking shape. The president-elect announced Tuesday that he has chosen Fox News Channel host Pete Hegseth to be his defense secretary, calling him a warrior for the troops and for the country. Hegseth is set to face a range of critical security challenges, including North Korea's growing military threats, Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, and instability in the Middle East. South Korea is closely monitoring the appointment, particularly regarding the future of Seoul-Washington joint deterrence efforts against North Korea's nuclear missile threats under the incoming Trump administration. So will the second Trump administration inherit deterrence policy programs launched under the Biden administration? And how will Trump's re-election shape security on the Korean Peninsula? For answers to this, we invite Bruce Bennett, adjunct defense researcher at U.S.-based think tank RAND Corporation, in the studio. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you for coming in. So let's first start with the latest appointment by President-elect Trump. So first, the defense secretary nominee needs to get approval from the Senate first. But even so, could you give us some background on who this figure is?
Well, before tonight, I'd never heard of him. So I don't think he's a well-known individual within the U.S. national security community. That said, what I've read about him, he's got an important background. I mean, having served in the National Guard, having fulfilled active duty assignments by volunteering, suggests that he's an individual who's in tune with the soldiers who actually are involved in fighting. That's a really good background for a defense secretary. He's sensitive to the needs of his troops. He's sensitive to the needs of his boss. So that's a good background. Hopefully things work out well.
So now with the incoming Trump administration, unlike President Biden, who prioritized trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo, President Trump is expected to have a different approach to alliance. With Trump's latest appointments in mind, what are your expectations for the trilateral alliance under the Trump's second term?
Well, I think we have to remember two things. One, Trump 2.0 isn't going to be Trump 1.0. He's learned things since then. He'll be different. Second thing to remember is over the last year, he's been candidate Trump, not President Trump. And as candidate Trump, he was trying to pull in votes from the American voters. So he was saying a lot of things about allies and others that would resonate with American voters, but not with the allies. Now that he's president, it's hard to tell exactly how he is going to proceed. There are a lot of reasons for believing that he will actually be delighted by the trilateral cooperation in the Western Pacific. But Trump is Trump. He changes his mind from time to time. And so I think we just have to wait and see how he proceeds. But this is not his most important issue on defense. So we may take a number of weeks or months before we get a good sense.
Right. We will touch upon Trump's priorities as we discuss this topic. Now, going back to South Korea, during his election campaign, Trump named South Korea as a money machine, and he raised concerns that he might push for a renegotiation of the defense sharing costs deal. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, again, that was candidate Trump, not
Right.
President Trump. So we don't know for sure as president how he's going to proceed. Back in Trump 1.0, he did ask for $5 billion a year from South Korea. I think what he has to understand, though, is the National Assembly in South Korea is not controlled by President Yoon's party. It's controlled by the opposition. President Yoon is not going to be able to go to them and say, oh, President Trump wants another $2 or $3 billion or whatever the number is, just give it to me from the National Assembly. They're probably going to say in that kind of case, hey, we've given the Ministry of National Defense their budget. If you want to spend more on that, then spend it out of the existing national budget. But if they do that, That means you've got to give up something. The something you have to give up is the acquisition of weapon systems. And the most expensive weapon systems that South Korea is acquiring are American weapon systems. So $2 or $3 billion extra, that means Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon are going to lose whatever business that is that Trump insists on extra funding. That's thousands of high-paying US jobs. So I think once the realization of what that means is brought home to the American side, I think there'll be some reevaluation, in part because those businesses are important political supporters. And they're going to get into the political game on that and say, this is not such a great idea.
Right. So as you mentioned a while ago, like the campaign Trump and the current President-elect Trump has different opinions on what should be done. Now, what if then, you mentioned about the scenario, what if Trump demands renegotiations? Then what could South Korea, how could South Korea respond to that?
I think the important thing here is response is the wrong approach. You need to be proactive. That's the way Trump is. Mm-hmm. And so I think South Korea right now should be starting its campaign. That may determine whether or not he makes a decision to want to renegotiate. But South Korea ought to be saying now, here's the balance of what's being spent on American troops. They're not dedicated to North Korea, dealing with North Korea. They're a regional presence for American security. So what's the reasonable balance between South Korea and the US in costs, and what impact will it have, as I just suggested, if there is an increase in that burden sharing that would have to come out of almost certainly military procurement.
Right. So speaking of the weapon systems, the American weapon systems, Korea, some of Trump's associates have raised the possibility of South Korea pursuing independent nuclear armament as part of a broader strategy to cut defense spending. Well, we have the Washington Declaration, and the South Korean government seems not open to the idea now, but do you see any foreseeable changes in the future?
Well, first of all, anybody who says that nuclear weapons will reduce your defense budget doesn't understand defense budgets. Nuclear weapons always increases them. Think about it. If South Korea ever has to go in to achieve unification with North Korea, you're not going to do that with nuclear weapons. Correct. They're not a trade-off against soldiers. You need more soldiers to be able to do that. Your army now has already gotten so small that being able to stabilize North Korea after even a peaceful unification is really questionable. So I think nuclear weapons will increase the South Korean defense budget, probably significantly, several trillion won a year at least. So that's one kind of problem that you face. And they don't necessarily give you what you need, because when is it that South Korea would use nuclear weapons? Well, only if the North does. Is the North going to really use them? We don't know. But many of the uses the North could follow probably can be dealt with more than adequately by the United States. Mm-hmm.
So you're saying that the pursuing of independent nuclear armaments issue in South Korea is not beneficial for South Korea?
Not necessary yet. I think what you have to look at is, where is North Korea going? You know, North Korea today may have 60 to 100 nuclear weapons. At the stage where it has 300 nuclear weapons, that's a very different situation. By that stage, I think it's almost predictable that South Korea will have nuclear weapons. But well short of that, where we are now, I think it's premature.
Right. Now, like we've said, one of the key areas of focus in the region is Trump's policy towards North Korea. While Trump emphasized his personal relationship with Kim Jong-un during his campaign, there are concerns that negotiations during his second term could be quite different, more difficult. Do you think his approach to North Korea will differ from the first term?
He isn't going to have a choice. Kim was furious about him walking out of the Hanoi summit. I mean, you know, Kim goes back to North Korea and fires a bunch of people and purges a bunch of people. I think that if Trump approaches Kim, Kim is going to say, well, sure, I'd be happy to negotiate if you give me this and this and this and this before we negotiate. Okay? Well, because Kim's instability now compared to 2019 is much higher, I believe. He can't look like he's weak. He's got to meet with Trump and get successes that he can bring home. If that's the case, then he is going to demand things up front from Trump. And that's going to be very hard for Trump to do, I think, early on, to give Kim anything significant without anything in return.
Right, then just one question popped out of my mind. So if Kim is going to require a lot more than previously when he speaks to Trump, but wasn't Trump's victory better for the side of North Korea than Harris's victory?
Those kinds of things are always unclear. You know, you've got a case where Kim had no relationship with Harris. So he may have been prepared to do some negotiating with Harris. He has a relationship with Trump, and while they exchange letters and all kinds of things, he knows that Trump can take action that will hurt Kim at home. And that's going to mean that he's going to want to make sure that if he does anything with Trump, he gets a victory out of it.
Then what about the chances for another Hanoi talks or talks anywhere around the world? What are the chances of a renewed Pyongyang-Washington talks under Trump's second term? And you've mentioned a while ago, but can you specify what kind of conditions could be met before they speak?
Well, I think Kim's first condition is going to be for the U.S. to recognize North Korea as a nuclear power. You know, he wants us to recognize them. He probably wants to be considered a full nuclear power according to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so that's a big deal. That's probably something the U.S. can't deliver because it's many countries involved in that. But he certainly wants to be recognized as a nuclear power. That then changes all in the negotiations that would go on. I think Kim will probably want relaxation of the sanctions against him. That's what he asked for in 2019. And he could go a lot further in a variety of other areas.
So there are scenarios that are being discussed where Trump might ease sanctions, like you said, in exchange for North Korea freezing its nuclear program. How do you see the possibilities?
Well, I think if you look public opinion polls in either the United States or South Korea, the chances of North Korean denuclearization are almost zero. Maybe as a long-term objective, 30, 50, 100 years from now, but for the immediate future isn't going to happen. On the other hand, Kim has made it very clear that he's headed for 300 to 500 nuclear weapons. That's a disaster for Korean security. So a freeze of North Korean nuclear production is actually a good outcome. It's something we ought to be prepared to trade to accomplish. Not many people are saying that, but that's, I think, the reality. So we need to start thinking about what it is we're prepared to trade for that kind of outcome.
Right, and that could be the lifting of sanctions.
It could be lifting of sanctions, yes. And it could be a number of other things, too.
Right, and given the current state of inter-Korean relations, there's concern that South Korea might be sidelined if U.S. and North Korea restarts talks. How should the South Korean government prepare to ensure it remains a key player in the dialogue?
I think, once again, this is a case of don't react, be proactive. I think South Korea needs to put forward to the United States what they think reasonable negotiating positions are, what they think they need in terms of, you know, Kim is likely not to freeze all of its nuclear program. what are the key things that South Korea would like to see frozen, and what they think you should be willing to trade to get those. I think that needs to be done very quickly, within the next few weeks, before you get the Trump administration in office with their people, so that those are ideas that the Americans have to start thinking about. Because at this stage, you know, you've got Russia, you've got the Middle East. Korea is not the immediate priority, probably, in the defense area.
Right. So there are sayings, and many people are concerned that North Korea's nuclear issue could be put to the back because of issues like from war in Ukraine and Middle East. Then what could we do from South Korea's perspective?
Again, this is the kind of thing where it needs to be proactive. The key here is, our decision makers, first of all, the president doesn't make all the decisions. Trump will want to make more than Biden did. But in reality, it's not even the Secretary of Defense, it's somebody under him who makes many of the decisions, subject to review by the Secretary, subject to review by the President, but those people make a difference. So Korea ought to be watching who is being nominated for those positions. It may yet be months before they're in place, but they should be preparing ideas. And one of the difficulties in any negotiation or defense issue is, how is it that we deal with the North? What are some ideas that we can use to deal with the North? You know, how do we convince North Korea that they ought to freeze? Well, one of the things we can do is not just say we're prepared to reduce sanctions. We're prepared to take the U.S. nuclear weapons storage in Korea, which hasn't been used since 1991, and modernize it if North Korea doesn't stop nuclear production at this facility and that facility. Those are things which are different ideas and would give the combined U.S. and ROK governments opportunities to then work together with Kim to try to convince him that it's in his interest and China's interest and the political interest of South Korea to take those actions.
So, for instance, the example that you've mentioned, then wouldn't the Trump administration be worried about North Korea's potential retaliation against that?
There is always, the American side always worries about adversary escalation. The reality, though, is, are we better off dealing with North Korea today when they have 50 to 80 or so nuclear weapons, or dealing with North Korea when they have 300? I think it's pretty obvious that it's better to try to deal with them today and to contain the threat within roughly the area where it is now. I think, you know, this is one of those cases where kicking the can down the road is a really bad idea. And yes, there are risks. But there, what we have to be prepared to do is say, yes, Kim, we know you could escalate. If you do, here are the consequences for you if you escalate. If you're playing a game like Go or chess, and you're only thinking about the next move, you're going to lose. You've got to be thinking 2 or 3 or 4 moves ahead. That's a key part of making things like this work.
Right. So we have to be proactive, as you said.
Exactly.
And think about many ways that we could speak and negotiate with North Korea. Now, when Trump returns to power, then what kind of adjustments should South Korea make to its North Korea, China, and Russia policies to maintain stability in the peninsula?
Well, I think there are a variety of things that need to be looked at in this kind of area. Number one, with Russia, North Korea has sent presumably about 12,000 troops to Russia to fight in Ukraine. I think this is Kim testing the water. I worry that 12,000 isn't the number he's going to send eventually. I think the number is going to be up to 50,000 or so. So I think South Korea should be approaching Russia and saying, you're giving military technology to North Korea in exchange for the troops. That is hurting our security. So you're giving us no choice. We're going to send artillery or whatever to Ukraine that hurts your security until you stop. So here's the trade-off we're prepared to make. We're not just going to accept you doing this. I think with regard to China, we need to be saying, isn't North Korea your worst nightmare? Because China wants to be the global superpower. Can it be a global superpower if a country like North Korea doesn't do what China tells it to do? Because North Korea almost never does what China tells North Korea to do. And many countries in Southeast Asia and elsewhere are looking at North Korea and saying, golly, we may not have to do what China says because North Korea gets away with it, why not us? So I think South Korea has got to be trying to demonstrate to China that it is a much more reliable partner than North Korea. I think those are the kinds of things we need to be thinking about, things that mostly we don't think about, but I think we need a bunch of new ideas.
Right, and we should be able to seek for, potential consequences and have backup plans on that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. All right, we will have to wrap up our discussion here. Mr. Bennett, thank you so much for your time and for your presence and insights tonight.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.